Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we are very, very excited to have Michael Strong on the show today to be talking about a whole bunch of learning type topics. You know, for example, Socratic learning, personalized learning, and then maybe we'll get to some agile management type stuff, applied education or elsewhere. And for me, I'm really excited about this because in many ways, mobbing has felt like a Socratic discussion. So how can we make that learning better? So before we jump into those topics, Michael, do you mind giving an introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm currently the founder and CEO of the Socratic Experience, our new brand for what used to be Expanse Online. I spent 35 years in K-12 education, becoming increasingly liberated from the system. And so now I'm kind of dancing around the boundary of self-directed education and structure. And so I'm very interested in how does one create a structure for learning without structure, so to speak, or optimizing freedom within a minimalistic rule set. I'll pause there and we can go into it more deeply.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe what's your take on Socratic learning? You know, what's your history with it and what's your take on it now?
Sure. So very basically, we can go back to the kind of dense version of Socratic, but for now, let's just talk about it as thinking and talking about ideas, which, you know, you talk about it in mob programming and so forth. Anytime people are thinking and talking about ideas, ideas are things that some of us live our lives thinking and talking about. You know, Kyle Griffin, he's always about ideas all the time. And you know, what people don't realize is most young people are not. Most school is not. And in fact, I once heard somebody describe, you know, in graduate school, one gets to think, talk, and argue about ideas. That's kind of like the dessert with education. Why do we leave dessert until the end? Why not let kids start having the fun thing of thinking, talking, arguing about ideas earlier? So very quickly, I actually went to a college, St. John's College, where for 4 years, all we do is read, think, and argue about ideas, classic texts, with great books. They now have an Eastern classics and an Islamic classics. But I would say that was a fabulous education for me. As a consequence, I hate lecturing. When I go to conferences and people are talking, you know, I did the unconference thing years ago where I only show up for lunch and drinks and never go to the talks because I can read about 10 times as fast as anybody can talk at me. So as a consequence, I'm all about autodidactism plus thinking, talking, learning together, arguing. That's how I learn. And so that's how I create schools where young people learn. And of course, they do math problems and they do experiments and do other things. But for me, this intellectual engagement where we're arguing about what's true, good, and noble, that's what it's all about.
Oh, that's fantastic. And yeah, and maybe some follow-up questions I might have is, well, for one, as a side note, as a hobby, I love reading classics and having discussions about them as well. But kind of turning to, you know, Socratic in general, or maybe even applying it to, let's say, a mob or a pair. You know, what's the good or what's the noble thing to do right now with the code? You know, what's the next experiment we run, or even how we treat each other. You're in a retrospective and people are having a discussion on ideas, on the process, or the people and the interactions in the code and how we can improve it. What are some patterns you've seen that helps those discussions go well, and maybe some anti-patterns from a Socratic perspective?
So now I'll jump up and be very abstract. For me, what is the essence of Socratic is that we all have a mutual expectation that each of us has a consistent, coherent understanding of reality, which sounds very abstract. But the way I operationalize that is if Austin says something that sounds like absolute nonsense, rather than saying, "You idiot, Austin," I would say, I don't understand how you can believe X and you can believe Y. Can you help me out? That is, I take the presumption of ignorance or mistake on myself. And it could be you have a perfectly coherent way of saying, well, of course we have to do this because of this. And you had this whole vision in mind that I didn't understand. And of course, that's obviously a much better approach than "you friggin' idiot," you know, just on the most fundamental thing. But the other thing is that approach, it could be that you're not as clear as you thought you were. And asking that kind of question, I hadn't figured out how to solve that kind of a problem. And so this basic presumption that if there's a disagreement, it's about misunderstanding. I just don't get what's going on. And on one hand, I encourage people not to take offense when we say, how do you understand this and that? But also ask it gently. So the question is not an implied, you think this and that, what's wrong with you? So I would say very sensitive to the social emotional context, while still insisting we all at every time should welcome and rejoice in being asked to make sense of our own positions. And that statement of it is perfectly general, whether it's solving a problem in a coding environment or talking about religion or politics. How can you believe X and Y? I hadn't thought about that. Or then, then you respond in a way that doesn't make sense. Okay, well, but what about Z? How does Z fit into that? This is where the consistent coherent comes in. So as a questioner, as a Socratic questioner, I'm always listening for pieces that seem inconsistent or don't make sense or don't vibe with my own reality. And then I spontaneously ask. And then likewise, if I say something that seems like nonsense to you, wait, Michael, you said this and you said that, or you want to do this and you want to do that. I don't get it. How does it work together? And I find that, that's a super simple, fairly abstract generalization. But for me, that's the fundamental tool, whether I'm talking to a 4-year-old or a 50-year-old.
Okay, cool.
What so in the I guess in the software environment, how is that applied, and maybe what is your process in that context?
So just because I'm working with Kyle actually on we're creating a Nigerian software company and working with Nigerian coders, and we're really focused on the specifications and deliverables. So it could be that, so I'll do a customer version of the conversation. The customer says she wants X and she also wants Y. And then if you know what's involved in that, very simply, well, there are trade-offs. And the customer may not be aware there are trade-offs. So, well, if you want X and Y, would you be willing to accept trade-off Z? Or it sounds as if you want this to work in this way and that to work in that way. I'm not sure if I can make those two work, or it will take this much time or this much complication. That is, you can think of it as just clarification. The kind of joke is children ask why, but why daddy, but why daddy, but why daddy? In a way, this is simply, but why this, how do these pieces fit together? I look at it really as understanding the other human being's mind. So when I'm asking somebody else a series of questions, I want to get inside your mind. Again, in one way, very simple, but it's very different from, I know what you should be thinking, and I'm going to, when I train teachers, I've spent decades training teachers. Classroom teachers are often the worst at this because their job is to tell you what to think. And even if they're asking questions, their questions are designed to lead you to an answer. I authentically want to know what the mental model is in your mind. I assume you have this mental model. So in terms of software specifications, again, the customer may not have a very clear mental model. The questions will help clarify the nature of the shared mental model, or come to a discovery process in which, we realize we do not share a mental model. So you can think of it as ever more granular questions, digging ever more deeply into exactly what are we talking about. Was that helpful?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is helpful. And I think, and maybe that's where I, out of transparency, maybe I've done it wrong before. And maybe that's, like you'll see, I can't think of the movie title, but there's movies where they're like, oh, that professor does the Socratic method, and everyone's scared, right? Because it's what you said, where they have an idea, they have a way they want you to think, and they're inflicting it upon you with questions, right?
Yeah, actually, The Paper Chase, it's a famous law school movie from the 1970s. There's sort of a great example of aggressive Socratic questioning. Just as a metaphor, I used to practice Tai Chi, and I regard that as sort of the karate hard style, Socratic questioning. I practice a much gentler sort of Tai Chi internal Socratic. And part of this is working with children. It doesn't help to beat up children, but in general, if one is aggressive in one's interactions, one's less likely to elicit the truth. So if my goal is to get an accurate mental model of whatever you believe, then it doesn't help for me to instill fear, anger, shame, whatever, by means of aggression. If my goal is to come to a perfectly accurate understanding of our mental models where they match, don't match, whatever, I actually need help make you feel safe and comfortable while asking questions. And with children who are sometimes they're children who are so egotistical, I can be as aggressive as I please and it's no problem. I'm sure you've had colleagues like that. You could just, full on beat them up verbally and they don't care. On the other hand, there's some people who run super delicate. Is it okay if I ask you another question? Do you mind if I ask such and such? And so I would say part of this too in practice is developing a sense of, all of us have people where we know each other so well, it's kind of like punching each other for hours when we're asking questions, but other people, super, super delicate.
Yeah, and I think that's been a learning experience for me for kind of the Socratic discussions that happen while mob programming is coming out of teams where it's extremely comfortable, right? Where we're, we'll be making bets and saying like, oh, no, you're wrong. Let's run this experiment and find it out. And it's like playful, but kind of aggressive. And you can't just take that everywhere is what I found out, right?
I'll go ahead and consider this, there are generalizations. Men tend to be more aggressive in their interactions than women do. And of course, not universally, but sometimes. And so I would say, and some of this is how well you know people and how safe everybody feels. Actually, kind of going in a techie direction, we're using something called immersion neuro, which is like a Fitbit. We use Scotia's brand. You can use Apple Watch or Fitbit, but it measures psychological safety and engagement in real time. And so if you ever wanted to do trials of when you're interacting with somebody, how safe do they feel and how engaged are they? You can actually get data, real-time data on this. And one of my dreams actually is to, all have goggles. So we could be having these goggles and, whoa, Chris is feeling really safe. Oh, Austin is freaked out by what I said. I mean, imagine in terms of optimizing our interpersonal interactions by having kind of goggles with real-time data about this. Totally possible now.
Whoa. So wait, slow down a bit. So you said something about, you said Fitbit, and what was it again, where you can measure this real time?
There's a man named Paul Zak, who's leading neuroscientist. He's developed this through years of study where it's based ultimately on patterns of the heart rate. And so all you need is something to measure the heart rate. I've mentioned Fitbit because it's well known. Apple Watch is the same thing. Scotia is a different brand. So it doesn't matter what the device is, but some device that provides, an accurate real-time measure, and then it is connected to their proprietary algorithm. But based on that, they have a, wonderful interface where you can actually see in real time, and this is, tested through years of certain patterns of, the physiology, what's going on with your blood and so forth. Blood chemistry is correlated with neural patterns and ultimately with heart rate patterns. But it's really cool technology that allows for these real-time observations.
Have you used this in a situation where you're applying the Socratic method while discussing something?
We use it in all our classes. So it's a default. The default is on in all our classes. So we have data from every class and every student. The idea is at scale for us to ensure we have high levels of engagement and psychological safety. And already they've done this with business trainings, and most business trainings, the engagement is really low in the training and then shoots up during the coffee break. Our pattern is exactly the inverse. Our students are super engaged when they're together, and then they tune out during break time. And we also have very high levels of psychological safety. But a lot of this is you have to optimize. Right now, we're small, about 50 students, so I can visit every class, train every guide, make sure it's all safe. But I want a techno, optimized system for scale, which means instead of monitoring every class, we have this device that tells us, whoa, that person over there is freaking the kids out. Better deal with it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's I'm very interested in something like that because for me personally, it's been a lifelong journey to become more perceptive. I didn't come out of the gate that way. And so it helps when I'm with people on a team who are more perceptive. So like, for example, in my personal life, my wife's very perceptive. So it's good for us to pair on things, basically, to understand where people are at. Where if I'm not working on and thinking about it, it's like I could just be in the abstract world of ideas and like not observant of, how psychological safe people are feeling or body language or those kind of things. So Something
No,
like
I'm
that.
very big on this. Just to give you another one, and
Yeah.
if you guys and your team want to create this, I'm working on this. There's also some MIT Media Lab software that allows real-time measurement of how often we're interrupting each other, who's dominating a conversation, and who's influencing whom. And so it picks up on patterns of human interaction. So in addition to the psychological safety and engagement, we could also see who dominates all the conversations, who's a big influencer, who's interrupting all the time. And you could imagine going on and on. So ultimately my vision is to have these tech optimized systems where we can train people to be really great at interpersonal interactions. And if any of us have any flaws, ultimately you could go machine learning. You have this, if you had a training set of really great high quality human interactions, or human interactions tuned to a particular aesthetic of human interaction. And I think in terms of aesthetics of human interaction, then you could train an algorithm on that and say, let's, we like the dynamic between Chris, Austin, and Michael. Let's tune a system so we can monitor for that. And then when people are not doing that, we can say, let's have more of whatever. I mean, ultimately, I'm looking for like the Spotify of human interactions, where at scale, you could have this, I feel more like that kind of aggressive interaction. I feel more like this kind of soft one. I'm playing with it, but you can see how ultimately we have the tech so that we can have really high quality and diverse types, species of. I wouldn't say there's one right way. We could have diverse species of human interactions and figure out how to tech optimize, train individuals or groups of human beings at scale. And I just think how many business meetings have we been in that suck? People are interrupting, people don't hear each other. One of the things is a lot of what I do with middle school students, and I pick on middle schoolers because they're the most, I lovingly call them barbarians. But a lot of what I do is person A speaks, person B listens and responds. Right there, that can take me months. But you can see how valuable it is. How many meetings have you been in when person B did not listen before responding? These sort of things, in terms of costs, we could come up with some incredible cost of wasted time because people are not listening and understanding each other all the time.
Yeah, so it's kind of like almost like a lean flip on conversation, like Socratic conversation is maybe the most optimized conversation is a Socratic one, given these metrics or something like that. Yeah, that's fascinating. I love it.
Just a pause on the cognitive side, and again, I see they joke, Eskimos have 35 words for snow. I get into different conversational aesthetics. So if you wanted, I know people who do something called circling, which is very sort of interpersonal. So the Socratic is the cognitive, do we have the same mental maps going on? But you could also imagine, various flavors of sort of emotional interaction also tuned. So ultimately I see this as, and a lot of people want to dictate, this is the right way to interact with other people. I'm like, no, forget one right way to interact, but we do need to find ways to align on certain norms of interaction and discover which kinds of norms are better for some outcomes and better for others, or worse for others. And so I see this as human interaction. Tech is going to take over. AI is going to eat the world, all yada yada, software is going to eat the world. But what do we humans do? We humans need to get a lot better at being human, which sounds strange, but I think a lot of this is, if we can optimize for different sorts of interpersonal style, and train young people and even train adults to do that, then you can imagine next time you join a different company, you can see on their Spotify playlist of human interactions, do I like that flavor? No, that sucks. That's not my kind of company. I want to go over there where they have this really cool sort of interactive style. Play with it.
Wow. Yeah.
Is that the kind of personalized learning piece? Is that you now have more information about how people might learn or interact, and so you can tailor the learning experience to that person? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
So I'll back up a little bit on that one. So right now there's a boom in personalized learning. What most personalized learning is ed tech that takes, say, the standard 8th grade curriculum and lets you go through it at your own pace. I think that's boring and banal. I think, most school curricula are garbage anyway. So why go at your own pace through a garbage curriculum? So the next step, and a new generation of ed tech companies are getting better at this, at helping you figure out what you might want to learn. And maybe, it's Japanese history or the scheme programming language or, I don't know what, but, this huge wild world of things. But the way I see it is ed tech is fabulous. It's going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. What most people don't realize is that the human interactions have to complement it. And so even one way to think about this is quality of focus. You know, I want to improve student focus. If the students' minds are just totally focused on a certain kind of game experience, for instance, they may be in fast interaction mode and they're not used to kind of slowing down and becoming contemplative. So going from, suppose we're trying to optimize learning through ed tech, is that just the curriculum? Is it just the kind of learning you're going to do? Maybe it also should include the style of interior experience you're having, the style of interpersonal experience you're having. So I would say I'm personalizing at another level beyond pace of curriculum, diversity of curriculum, to ultimately kind of experience. I'm a big believer in the notion of the experience economy. Most of us have enough goodies, you know, in the developed world, but what we want are high quality experiences. So what are crappy experiences? The dentist's office is pretty crappy. DMV is pretty crappy. K-12 schooling is pretty crappy. You know, sitting in traffic are crappy. So I think a lot of the big wins are a lot of business meetings. Most business meetings are crappy. So I'm all about, yeah, let's let software eat the world, and then let's have a human complement, so that what we're really doing is driving, ultimately my goal is for all of us to be working on helping other people have higher quality experiences all day, every day. So imagine if everybody you knew did nothing but help you have a better experience all day, every day. That was true for your children. That was true for every, you know, fun world, fun, positive world. I'm an optimist.
Yeah. And I think I've seen that maybe in kind of in the work setting, the home setting, but like in the work setting. So let's say, I want to learn a particular kind of tech, right? And so you can do the kind of online learning, screen time learning, and if it's just left alone at that, it's kind of missing something, right? And it's kind of, maybe it's what you're talking about here, the human complement, where I learned something and then I go and in a learning session with a mob or a pair, I'm like, hey, this is kind of what I heard. What have you heard? And then, as you're talking about before, you ask with curiosity, not ask to inflict an idea, you know, to really hear what they think. And then they share their ideas, and then we try some things together. And like both things together seem to work really well. A positive human interaction to take it to the next level, but also content coming from some screen time, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is where I see the other thing is, once one's curious, then autodidacticism becomes much easier. And I'm a big fan, you know, I learn on my own. I'm a voracious learner, and I don't, what would I go to school for? What would I ever take class again for? Basically, you know, it's a waste of time. But I do want, people to think and talk about things with, and the classical liberal arts college experience, you know, people staying up late, you know, having long conversations in the evening. I think that's sort of the human essence of education that I want ed tech to take care of all the boring. In my schools, we use ed tech to teach basic arithmetic and grammar and punctuation. You know, there are things for which ed tech can be brilliantly optimized. But if it's all ed tech, if all you're doing is sitting on computers going through stuff, it is boring. You know, I think that's part of the reason the MOOC rates completion is so low. And sometimes I'll have a discussion section, but the discussion section, boring. What are you doing? You know, a bunch of bored, you know, I'm going to be nasty, but a lot of discussion sections of online courses are just boring. But I want to have, but the best kind of online communities, there are online communities where it's really exciting and dynamic. So some of this too is, how do we think about what makes things exciting and dynamic? I would say a healthy disagreement is part of what makes things. If people agree too much, it's boring. If they're too vicious or aggressive in their disagreement, most of us don't have time to deal with that. So how do we create constructive, enlivening, energizing disagreement on a consistent basis? And some of this gets into both the conceptual kinds of questions, but also the interpersonal tonality of it. Yeah. Just to give you one more thing, I once had an artist, I often lead adult Socratics in person wherever I am, also virtually, but an artist once draw pictures of everybody, kind of the social emotional dynamic of the group. And she would, you know, have this anger energy between these two people and this romantic energy over here, this curious energy over here. So you can imagine, suppose you have this cartoonist drawing the social emotional vibe. You know, ultimately that's what I want tech to do, but we'll have cartoonists illustrate the tech at some point.
Nice. Yeah, the what we were talking about reminds me, Chris, where you're telling me you'll go to a conference and then you'll spend it the whole time in the hallway, just having this long conversation with someone you've been meaning to talk to for a while. And I think Chris and I do this often. I think there's usually a weekly topic that we disagree on, but we go back and forth and learn on quite a bit. So, yes, fervently.
But there's a level of trust and respect between the two of you. And so I think part of this is, how do we consciously, intentionally build that trust and respect in different situations where you don't have that? But I think that's one of the great, a lot of great friendships are built on this. Great friendships are built on, we can disagree in a healthy way and it's fun.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe one other thing on Socratic, and then maybe we'll jump to Agile management education and elsewhere. But so one thing that I see is kind of like, it's not a refutation, but it's almost like a drop the mic thing. You see people do every once in a while when you talk about Socratic learning, is they're like, oh, but they killed Socrates, right? So.
Well, actually, this is a big and worthwhile thing to point out on, because Socrates was accused of corrupting the young and not believing in the gods of the state. And his young followers would go around Athens and ask wealthy and powerful people embarrassing questions. And ultimately they killed him. On the other hand, I see that willingness to question authority and question conformity as the fundamental driver of intellectual progress in Western civilization and around the world. And so personally, I have a really strong resistance to anyone who wants to tell me that I have to submit to authority or submit to conformist norms. Right away, my independent thinking alarm bells go off. And so I'm a passionate, I would say, a direct consequence of the Socratic. Galileo is a hero. All these people, Martin Luther King, letters from Birmingham jail. I'm a very passionate advocate of freedom of thought, freedom of speech. John Stuart Mill's on liberty, because we have to be free to discover and explore in every direction. Otherwise, we will be stuck in either the authority structures from the past or the conformist structures of the present. And of course, we could probably all name 20, 30, 50 authority and conformist structures that we don't want to be stuck with. Direct connection between Socratic inquiry, one's individual conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of speech.
Right on.
Awesome. Okay, so regarding Agile management and education, what do you have there? Is it, how do you apply it? What have you seen in the past? Those sorts of things.
So there's something called Agile Learning Centers that are one effort. There are a lot of people that are moving in this direction. I think one of the biggest challenges in education, it's one thing if you have clear specifications and you want to have a lot of flexibility in terms of how do we reach clear specifications. I think the biggest problem, well, first, again, I think there are sort of two worlds. One are the world of people who accept the standard K-12 specifications. There are scholars, Tyack and Cuban are Stanford scholars who call it the grammar of schooling. This is 10th grade, this is 11th grade, this is math, yada, yada, yada. I suppose one can try to be more fluid in the standard structure, but I think anybody who's interested in doing anything in a new way quickly realizes no. It's such a slow waste of time, in which case we have to figure out what are the appropriate specifications so that people have as much autonomy and authority as possible, but yet in some kind of united specifications. So I'm working on implementing a version of holacracy. Brian Robertson, I would assume you guys are familiar with holacracy, which he says was inspired by Agile, his experience as an Agile developer. And I would say one of my biggest, I'm also working with Tom Gilb. I don't know if you guys know Tom Gilb, but in both cases, the real task is how do we have specifications once we want to be very open-ended? And right now, one of my, which in some ways may sound like a trivial problem, but my ultimate, when I think about it from first principles, my ultimate specification is I want lifetime happiness and well-being for my students. The Greeks said, no man knows if he's happy until he dies. Obviously, we can't have a lifetime horizon, but actually happiness and well-being, while I'm moving towards and working on clear specifications, are happiness and well-being. But then immediately you get into all sorts of issues of how do we measure that? This is even where I get into the device of, okay, if we need specifications, I do need a way to measure this. And that way, I can again let people figure out how to optimize without controlling them, but we need to have clear specifications. Surveys are not adequate. This immersion neuro is pretty cool, but also I'm looking at, and this may sound more traditional again, SAT verbal. And I just mentioned SAT verbal because the Socratic work we do, where we're reading texts closely every day, is very similar and difficult, often classic texts, is similar to what's tested on the SAT verbal. And so that's on the academic side, but it's perfectly general. It doesn't say what we're going to read. So that's kind of on the academic side. SAT math as well, but that's trickier because only some students, maybe only a third of my students, really care about math in a big way. And part of personalization is if I have a creative who might be also dyslexic and she is world-class animator, do I really have to force her to do Algebra 2? And I would say, no, I don't want to force her to do Algebra 2. And so that's why I take math out of the standard specifications. But then already we're starting to get into different pathways where we have the SAT verbal for some, we have the SAT math for other. What do we do with a child with learning disabilities or differences and who may be a creative or entrepreneurial genius? How do we evaluate, measure that in a standard way? So I may be kind of being fuzzy, but this is where I am right now, is how to radically personalize while also developing clear specifications so I can have a system in which staff have a lot of autonomy and yet are aligned in terms of where they're going. Pause there to see if that makes sense, or if that's
so maybe in the holacracy model, right? You have you have these points of responsibility and circles of interest, and maybe perhaps the circles of interest comprise of students, and the points of responsibility may be the teachers of on some level responsible for following up, but then maybe subscription to each of those circles is optional, but hopefully decided upon by that circle of interest, something along those lines. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
It's a somewhat added thing of all of this is very high touch. What we do is very high touch. Yeah. And how do you do that without being consumed with endless conversation? And especially, again, once I started personalizing education, you can never, ever personalize enough. Human beings are radically individual. Children, you guys are parents. I'm sure you already see each of your kids is different. Each of their interests are different. The way they learn is different. What they interact is different. And imagine, and as parents, I expect you try to personalize, at tiny scale. How do you do all those real-time decisions you're making, and how do you help? Again, right now I'm small, but I want to scale. Can probably be 100 students in October, 200 students in January, maybe 500 students next fall. Right now I'm in this place of how do we set up those circles so that it won't consume endless iterative guide time in terms of, well, are they a creator? Are they entrepreneur? Or no, they're this third category. What about the athlete? Again, I'm very much trying to figure out all those circles and how they relate, and how to prevent this from endless adjustment.
You need the hat from Harry Potter, just put on their head. Yes, scalability there is really hard. And I'd looked at holacracy a lot, kind of in the early days of the formation of the department that we work in. And so that was pretty interesting. Just even with a group of adults, it's very difficult to do at a scale, at a smaller scale than what you're speaking of. And so, it'll be very interesting to hear about your journey and the answers that you come upon in your experiments.
Yeah, and on the one hand, I think it's maybe a little bit easier if you have clear specifications. On the other hand, the great advantage is we can be endlessly flexible with respect to specifications. But again, this is why the way I look at it is the more things I can pin down solidly, again, whether it's tech optimized or some other sort of clear standards, clear and explicit metrics, then we'll have more time for the things which require human decision making. And so in some ways, one way to think about this is how do we simplify things as much as possible so the human decision making is both highly needed, but not incredibly time consuming. And part of this is a brand promise. The other thing is at the top, we are advertising, we're marketing to parents. And when we market to parents, we have a brand promise. We discover and develop your child's genius, which parents love, and yet you can see that implies radical personalization. And so how do we align potentially thousands of classrooms in a really high quality, rigorous way with that kind of brand promise? So yeah, if you have any people who are perfect systems gurus, this is the problem I'm trying to solve right now.
Yeah, and maybe you're hitting on it, and maybe I didn't capture it, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating here, but so I think for us, and then many of our audience, we have a collection of adults that we have good reason to believe that being a learning organization, as well as developing products and things like that, is very good for innovation, right? Because if you're not learning, you're not innovating, right? And so there's as you talked about, traditional, like, here are the things you're going to learn, and you're going to learn in this order. And then there's kind of like wide open, here's some time to learn, go learn whatever you want. How do you balance the two, I guess, is my perspective. Because there is, while learning anything is good, there are certain things that seem really good for many to learn, or maybe not all, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you balance? Maybe that's what you're talking about with specification. Maybe you can dive into that a little bit more. Yeah.
This is a great question. This really is a challenge, because I think a lot of us agree. By the way, Paul Graham, I think, does real brilliant work in education. I love Paul Graham's work in education. He's raising his children. He talks about spontaneously motivated interest is the big win. Almost anybody who does something great is interested and pursues it with a passion. And so this top-down education system kills that. Ken Robinson had the most popular TED Talk ever, millions and millions of views. And he said, schools kill creativity. That's true. So the way I approach the problem you're asking about is, first, reading, writing, speaking, listening, conceptual thinking, these are universally important. So again, every day we have Socratic discussion where we read and discuss a text. Students are constantly expected to write. One of the ways I get them to write is, hello, an essay is simply a formal argument. So Chris says blah, blah, blah. Austin says blah, blah, blah. And Chris says because of X, Y, Z. Austin says because of ABC. You've each outlined an essay. Okay, now you have a thesis statement, go write the essay. So we make this very natural transition from conversation, argument, which kids love. Kids do love to argue. That's one of our secret sauce. To essay writing is not this stupid English teacher assignment. I personally hated English class in high school. Instead, what writing is two people or more than two people arguing their points. It's organizing your thoughts, writing a crisp email memo, boom, 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 boom. That's great writing. So we get students to understand that reading, writing, listening, thinking, universally valuable. You got to become great at this. You'll have more opportunities if you're great at reading, writing, speaking, listening. And then I would add the conceptual thinking, because again, you guys think conceptually all the time. Standard school does not train kids to think in terms of ideas. Most of school is memorize and forget. I've actually seen students at regular schools who are in history class, they are highlighting terms in a chapter because the teacher told them to, but they have no idea what it means. Freedom, justice, liberty, huh? Whatever. So first you have to get them interested in real thinking about ideas, and then these universal characteristics. Beyond that, then, how to have a great life. So 80 to 90% of our students college, and so most of the default path is college prep. Our recipe for college admissions consists of great SAT scores, a few great AP scores, and great projects. So advanced placement courses, if you do, you don't have to, your child doesn't need 15 AP courses. But if your child has, say, 3 or 4, score of 5, scored on 1 to 5, 5's the top score, they can score 5 on, say, 3 exams. They have great SAT scores, and then they do a rockstar project. Depending on their scores in the project, they can get into college anywhere. But what that does is the SAT ensures they have high-level intellectual skills, math and verbal. The AP courses show that they can, in fact, do well on a serious college-level course. And then the projects, again, this is like real life. My goal is for all of our students to do, at the age of 18, adult-level professional work, if not better. I've had students write software, write novels. I had a student do a 3-day music festival where he had bands from around the world, $80,000 budget that helped him get into UT Austin. I had a student who did training videos for Kaiser Permanente, the California healthcare chain. So the idea is real world projects are both a great college admissions ticket, along with the proof of academic ability, and then they set them up for actually doing stuff in the real world as opposed to just passively doing school. So in terms of this balance, There's the universal, call it thinking and communications package, then optimized for college admissions, which includes some standard academic work. And then everybody does the project, which is good for anyone, anywhere, because that's what life is about. So that's a super quick tour on how I balance them, but I'll pause for questions and comments on that.
Yeah, we might be coming at time, but I guess, so I'm thinking about that through for my kids, and I'm really enjoying that thought process, but also at work, just thinking of like, I have seen good come from book clubs, right? Hey, we're gonna read this book together or listen to this audiobook together and come together and discuss, or it's been fun, like, oh, we're gonna make an app, watch app, you know what I mean? And then people, kind of congregate around that, whoever's interested in that. And so, yeah, you're right. I can see how some of these concepts apply, and in the sense that there needs to be a foundation of being able to think conceptually and talk and discuss well and that kind of stuff. So, but we are coming up on time, but yeah, so go ahead.
I'm just gonna pause real quickly. So book club is a common metaphor. What I would emphasize is some book clubs are kind of just social gatherings. We're intellectual, and I have kids read much more intellectual material. The true, the good, and the, we read, I have 8th graders reading Plato. So a lot of this is, think of a very highly intellectual book club in which it becomes normalized to think about very complex things.
Nice. Awesome. So we are coming up on time, but is there anything you'd like to plug or share before we close?
So the Socratic Experience, right now, it's a placeholder website, the Socraticexperience.com, so no the. And if anybody's interested, you can also look at our work on expanseonline.com. I actually have a series of YouTube videos where I began asking Socratic questions of a 4-year-old. She's the daughter of a friend. She is now 8. So those of you with younger children might want to look at Socratic Michael Strong on YouTube and see what it's like to ask young children. I actually believe it develops cognitive ability. So if you want your kids to be bright, articulate, and capable, maybe you're already asking them questions, but engage intellectually from the youngest age, and voila, we'll all be articulate, happy people engaged in this world of futuristic, fabulous interpersonal relationships as we think, grow, and make the world a better place.
Awesome. Well, at this point, I'd just like to ask our viewers to, maybe think of somebody who is trying to coordinate a learning environment, or maybe somebody who's raising kids right now. If you think that this video would be interesting for them, please share it with them. And with that, thank you, Michael, for joining us. And to all our viewers, like and subscribe, ring the notification bell, and we will see you all later. Thank you very much. Bye.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.